Hi everyone. Today we are talking to an Australian independent defense industry analyst and a veteran. We are discussing the new East Coast submarine base, also the relocation of the B-52 bombers, the problems of the Australian defense industry, and also how China is taking all those challenges. Welcome to the show. Hi everyone. Today we have a guest from Australia. We will talk today about the Australian point of view on various issues in Asia, mostly with respect to China and US. So our guest today is Matthew Millard. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Richard. I'm Matthew Millard. I'm an independent researcher, defence consultant. I did a bit of time in the Australian military as well. So that's basically it. I think the main thing is I'm surrounded by the right people, essentially. So I do hear what's happening and
Good, thank you very much. I would like to start with the defense industry. So I think there are some complaints in Australia that the industry is depending on the US, that the naval shipbuilding industry in disarray, and that it's dominated by big overseas prime contractors. So there is also no strategic plan, and that Australians haven't produced a national security strategy since 2013. So could you please tell us what's the situation in Australia? What are the complaints about? Are they justified or not?
well, the talks, especially about the supply chain issues, is a big one. As we saw with COVID, you can't exactly rely on these supply chains coming from overseas, especially when times get tough. A big one for Australia is we already manufacture our armored vehicles, our small arms, non-guided ammunition, but we need to start producing our guided weapons, our missiles. And so there's a big push at the moment through the Australian Missile Corporation developing, I think it has partners in the hundreds, working together to try and establish the manufacturing of missiles in Australia, because relying on imports from America is a disaster, really, especially when even during peacetime. Imagine in a global conflict and we're waiting for shipments to come. We saw with another supply chain issue years and years ago with I think it was one of our fighter jet programs. I think it was the Hornets, and Australia needed these little chips to continue the operation of the aircraft, and we were getting it from America. And every time we needed chips, there was issues with America putting their invoices and their stock and their what they needed in front of Australia's priorities, and that was during peacetime. So in a global conflict, when things are running 100-fold, to rely on getting the things you need is it will be an issue. So we really need to focus on building up the Australian defence industry and becoming self-reliant. That's a big one at the moment.
Yeah, but no matter what's the outcome, it would still take years, right? So it's kind of that
It's too late.
Australia is still behind China in terms of armament, right? So that you're just catching up.
Well, exactly. America has given its allies a 10-year period, essentially, of
Yes.
when it thinks China will make a move on Taiwan. And essentially that 10-year period is to bolster up our military. And for Australia, a big one is our defence industry. We're behind the eight ball. And I think America has figured out, especially with the AUKUS, with the development of AUKUS, is if instead of just America really wants to deter China, it can't just focus on building itself up. It needs to build up its allies. And essentially, I feel like that is the main focus for AUKUS, is to really help build Australia's strength, especially within our region. And then we move on to the submarines. Is nuclear submarines will definitely bolster Australia's abilities.
The next topic I would like to discuss are the B-52 bombers, because I think the government is planning to station six B-52 bombers, and there is some preparation going on. I think the US is going to pay for part of it. For example, there is an expansion plant, like the parking area, that can accommodate those six bombers.
Mhm.
And there is also a huge financial commitment from the side of the US. So, what's the status of those bombers?
Um, so the first stage was, well, firstly we saw them America building some huge fuel, military fuel, aircraft fuel facilities near this base Tyndall, RAF base Tyndall, which is where they'll be based. And for people that don't know, that's Darwin, Northern Australia, which is going to be a real strategic, um, you know, asset for America, especially with the threat of China. So we saw them establish some massive fuel tanks in the area, and then we hear that Australia is going to station 652 B-52 bombers in the area, and like I said before, there was a bit of people for it and people against it, and even on LinkedIn, as you saw, with a lot of comments, so many people against it, saying why, and our when the new government came in, they were big on. I'll read you a quote from the Australia's Defence Minister Richard Marles when he came in. He said, as he emphasised that the new Australian government sees China as a destabilising regional presence and believes Australia's capabilities, sovereignty, and security are all enhanced through its alliance with the United States. So a big thing, and the Australian defence community really had our eyes on the new government when they came in, wondering what their stance was going to be towards China, the CCP. So a big one is really boosting our alliance with America and boosting their presence in the region. And these B-52 bombers are exactly what we should be doing. And another thing we should be doing is, I believe, is figuring out how we can have another, perhaps a American naval base or some more permanent presence here in Australia. I feel like in the future that will definitely be a possibility.
Okay, so I think there is an even more thorny issue is as you mentioned, the AUKUS deal, and I would like to discuss now the current state of affairs. I think your government has a short list, chose three locations for the East Coast base for the nuclear subs,
Yeah,
and so that's at least a step forward. Even until it's all finalized, it's probably a few decades. I think the government wants to involve the local authorities, the government, industry. Is there any progress?
yeah, a few decades. I hope not, because like I said before, this 10-year period is all we really have. In America, they assessed and estimated that it would be around 2027. That China is the best moment for China to take Taiwan. So if all these things are happening too slow, it'd almost be no point, really, would there? Um, there was 19 possible locations
Yes.
around the east coast of Australia, which is our most populated area in Australia. Western Australia will host future nuclear subs, but right now, with Australia, you could look at the map of Australia and go, "Oh, we need a nuclear, you need a naval base here, we need a naval base here, an airfield here," but it just can't happen because Australia's population, most of it's on the east coast. As you know, it's all our population is just around the edges of Australia, and a big thing at the moment is recruitment and retention for the military. And we can't just put naval bases in the middle of nowhere and expect that people want to be posted to these locations. They come with families. These people, you need schools, you need grocery stores. So there are a lot of better locations for it, but you've got to think about, will these locations be close to deep water? Will these locations be close to, stores, ammunition, supplies, things like that? How close they are to training areas, which I think was more of a situation with the Collins class electric diesel subs. But I guess being nuclear, they can be out in the water, they can travel as far as they can. So that's probably not big of an issue. But also, yeah, these three locations took them a while to really pick and figure out which locations are best. Uh, and in regards to the local governments and industry being involved, yeah, I thought I read next year they're even going to start, you know, starting to, lay the ground, figure out all the final touches of which industries, which companies are going to be involved in the construction. I was almost going to say destruction, construction of the areas. Yeah. So I think things are happening soon, but will it happen quickly? And I guess the main question is, when will we get these subs?
Okay, but since it looks like there would still probably be some discussion going on in the media among the experts, so my question would be how much do you think, how strong is the Chinese influence in your domestic discussion? How much is the society or the experts influenced? In other words, maybe to put it stronger, how much compromised is Australia by Chinese interference in your discussion?
That's a question that um, I think when everyone gets asked this, they got to really watch what they say too, because um, I have seen, we have, I think, nearly 1 million Chinese-born
Yeah,
Australians, in Australia, and then we have, nearly 2 million, um, you know, Chinese Australians in Australia. But I've seen a lot of people in positions of power that who knows where their loyalties lay, essentially. And
yes.
if you go down the rabbit hole of how much China is influencing this decision, that decision, oh, it's a big one to go down. And and touching on that as well, I'll get back to it, but I just wanted to bring up every time with the Belt and Road Initiative, if you really look at when China comes to these nations and invests in these programs and gives loans to these countries and they can't pay back, not only do they ask for other things with repayments with the um, I think it was the Pakistan case where they had to give a 99 lease on their
Yes.
port or something. Yeah, because they couldn't pay back, the debts and stuff. But also, what happens if you really look into it? Every time China will do an investment into a country, there'll be a huge influx on Chinese citizens moving to that country. Um, and I don't know if it's all a part of the plan to make those countries more like China and
It seems so because we see the same thing in the Pacific Islands. We see this in many countries. There is
yes,
always an influx of Chinese, and the government can get back to them. They say, "Hey, you still have family in China, so yeah, you see the police precinct. We are calling you. You see who's behind me. That's your uncle." So yeah, they definitely exert pressure. But
yeah,
that's
that's
what I
it.
mean. How
Yeah,
is Australia dealing with it? Because there are some countries, as the US, recently more cautious and aware of the issue, definitely Taiwan. But yeah, this problem occurs
yeah,
everywhere where Chinese have interest. Canada,
that's
Australia, Taiwan, US. So how aware is the Australian public or the experts of this issue?
see. One thing is Australia. What the new government did when it came in was increase the cyber warfare investments and things like that. But one thing they never talk about and never you never see really happening is focusing on insider um, issues and the way that influence. You never hear anything about it, and the Australian government, the people of Australia are oblivious to it, and they almost don't want to talk about it. Um, and another thing that is an example of that is when people talk about the buildup of Chinese military, and you're talking to just a random citizen, and they'll be like, "Oh, America has huge military. Why can't China?" And you explain to them that America has a global influence. They're focused on upholding the international, um, you know, rules based order of the world, and also the global war on terror. They also have 750 foreign bases that they need a large military to to man, and China has one foreign base, what, and America is also in more treaties than any other country. They're the biggest contributor to the UN and NATO. Like, there's reasons why America needs a huge military, but the reasons for China is not there. They say it's for protection or, the defense of the nation. Well, you wouldn't have to double the size of the Australian. So what happens is, I read a big article about China. The increase of their military is double what Australia has every 18 months. So doubling the Australian Navy every 18 months. You don't need to do that for the defense of your country. There's other aspects at play here. But touching back on the interference in Australia, who knows, Richard? I really don't know. I guess we will see how things play out, how much it's influenced by. But, money talks. And as we saw with the Solomon Islands, proof of Chinese, the CCP putting money in the politicians' bank accounts. I don't know what for, who knows what for, but you could look around and see, what has happened, and that will be the reason why they put money in those bank accounts. But another thing I just want to touch on, and it touches on the cyber side of things, when the focus is so much on hacking and cyber and not in focusing on who is giving information, right? And with Boeing, I'm not sure if you're aware of Boeing's, it's an unmanned, uncrewed aircraft called, it's a Loyal Wingman program, and it's called the Ghost Bat. Anyway, an exact copy of that aircraft was shown at a Chinese convention, and
Yes, yes.
people talking about hacking, hacking this, hacking that. They need to focus on who is giving this information, who has ties to the CCP, who might have other, interests elsewhere, because that I believe is going to be a huge one. And also, not just now in peacetime, but if a China-Taiwan conflict occurs, Australia gets involved, because we have agreed that we will, just like America. And China's response was, Australia will suffer the same fate as America if it gets involved. So essentially a war will be against Australia and China. Australia will be involved. What Australia needs to focus on, well, ASIO and ASD, which is Australia's secret service, essentially, our spy agency, needs to focus on all those Chinese Australians that live here. Once we're going to war with China, we need to start to really figure out where everyone's loyalty lays. And I tell you what, there's a lot of people in powerful positions that, who knows?
Yeah, and also I think there was on few occasions not really the government, but like Chinese media journalists or maybe experts. They even mentioned a nuclear strike. They said if Japan gets involved, same thing. If Australia gets involved, same thing. So they've been
Yeah.
threatening the US, Australia, and Japan. They don't take hostages. They just go all in. I think that's the problem. And the West isn't that committed. For China, it's the major issue. For the West, it's not, but it's slowly becoming, I guess. The last
Um,
issue I want to discuss is so that the problem that appeared a few years ago when your government wanted to clarify the Wuhan virus origin, we know what happened. But now there is another point of contention. It's the AUKUS deal, and China has been attacking Australia internationally and also on the UN forum and the International Atomic Energy Agency. They've been complaining that you contribute to proliferation of arms, and they also attack your government through social media. They criticize the AUKUS deal, especially among your neighbors, Indonesia and Malaysia. So it seems like it's really, really painful for the Chinese government that you took this step. So do you have any other examples, or could you see how China is attacking your government with regards to this project? I think there is recently, even today or yesterday, a Global Times an article that says that following this path would stir up trouble and create unwarranted suspicion about Beijing's intentions in Asia. So you shouldn't go this path because it would affect bilateral relations.
Yeah. Um, yeah, you definitely named all the harsher ways they might have really spoke about their position. I was thinking the other day about some softer approaches because there's hard approaches and soft approaches they do to really you know affect different governments as such. And a big one at the moment is almost like pretending there isn't an issue, like pretending that trying to trying to get in the Australian the public's ears about that there isn't relationships are good, this and that. A big one to do with trade. Like for a long time, Australia has focused so much on making sure that Australia's trade with China is solid and that we're friends, this that. Purely because 33% of Australia's trade comes through China. It is important for our economy, but I think people really need to realise that trade and security are completely separate issues. Yes, security comes under, is a key with trade. But US and China are each other's biggest trading partners, yet each other's biggest security risks. And as you know, like Taiwan trades with China, yet Taiwan is building its military to defend against China. I think the public needs to realize that just because you trade with a country doesn't mean you're best friends and that they aren't a security risk. And a lot of the things I have been noticing in the news is that softer approach of trying to make the Australian public think that they're our friends. We shouldn't worry about them. We shouldn't worry about what they're doing. Trying to blind people to what is really happening, and it works.
So, to wrap this up, we could say that the Australian government is slowly waking up. And the best proof of that is that the CCP is getting nervous, unhappy, and uncomfortable about the situation, right?
Exactly. What the new government did when there was a few things the government did when it came into power, this new government, and we were, like I said, we were watching to see how their approach to China was going to be, because a lot of the time it's been a soft approach, but they've initiated a strategic review for our military, which is a huge one because for a while now we've been fighting in the Middle East abroad, and now our focus needs to be on our own strategic environment. So this strategic review will be essentially to figure out what Australia needs, what the military needs towards the growing threat. And that's one step of them admitting that there is a threat in the region. We need to figure out what we can do, what we need to do to counteract that. The joint declaration with Japan, which China wasn't happy about, we've like I said, we've increased our cyber warfare investments. And one thing I have seen a lot at the moment is increasing our training with allies. We've always trained with allies, but these last couple of years, it's really increased. So I think all these little things are our government's way of going, well, there are issues and we need to address them. Another thing is we're very close to signing a security treaty with PNG, which is our closest neighbour. When you look at top of Queensland, we have a few little islands off the mainland. You can almost swim to PNG, so it's really important that we have close ties with our neighbours, and not only for regional security, but if a war does break out, a global conflict with China, there will be the eye of the war will be in the Taiwan Strait around Taiwan, but both sides will spread their forces and to surrounding countries, station their assets in as many countries as they can, just like Japan did and allies did during World War II. And not only does that enable your country to be able to deploy from different areas, have supplies in different spread out, but also creates an area denial. So your enemy can't access these areas. So for Australia, if a conflict starts with China, we're not just going to have our military near Taiwan. We're going to have our military pushed beyond our borders to our surrounding to the surrounding countries. You can't just have everyone's there. Like in Taiwan, near Taiwan, and then everyone back on our shores. You need to have, your shoreline should be your last line of defense. So we need to really be able to have a good relationship with the countries around us. So if things happen, we can push our forces and they can host our assets in those countries.
That's a great point. Very much so. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and that's why it was a huge issue with China's influence in Solomon Islands.
Yes.
America had brought it towards us to Australia and New Zealand. They years ago they said it's your responsibility to uphold the influence in the area. Because when you talk about US, you talk about US and allies. So it's either Chinese influence or US influence. And also to keep the international rule-based order in the region as well. So when we, for years, our approach in the region has been very soft, and we need to kind of boost that influence. And you saw with China's growing influence in Solomon Islands that we really need to boost that influence in those areas, or we won't have these countries that we can deploy, host assets to and create that area denial in our strategic environment, because they will be buddies with China or this and that. So that's super important. And I think with the AUKUS situation, America has sat down with the Australian government and gone, this is what needs to happen. This is what we need to do to really kind of deter China. And straight away, when the AUKUS deal happened, you started noticing all these little changes that are absolutely important for Australia's strategic interest. Yeah.
Yeah. Very, very good comment. Thank you for that. Thank you for your time, Matthew. I appreciate it a lot.
Thank you for watching the show. Please leave a like or a comment. If you didn't like it, share it.